Okay, thank you everyone for being here, just like Sarah said. So I am going to share my screen. And at any point, if you have questions or comments or anything you would like to add, please unmute and add your comments, or you can even put in the chat. Now, I don't see chat, so Sarah, can you monitor that for me? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so to start off with, you'll see that basically this PowerPoint I have borrowed with permission and have adapted a little bit from a gentleman from Cornell University. Dr. Reitz is the director of counseling and psychological services. I heard him speak about a month ago, and what he said was really impactful to me. He was able to articulate some of the thoughts that I had, but he had just put it together so well that yeah, and he gave me permission to use this. So we'll go ahead and get started. So basically, he spent a lot of time talking about the research. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that because we don't have a lot of time, but basically this was the gist of what he was saying. So, and let me also say some of the research dated as far back as like the mid 80s to present day, and some not until the 90s until, to present day. And a lot of the research was conducted with students in 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. Okay, so just to kind of put all of this in perspective. So over the years, since the, either the 80s or 90s, students increasingly report more feelings of sadness, hopelessness, anger, and depression. They're spending less time with friends. They're spending less time away from their parents, so more time with parents. Less time dating, or fewer students going out on dates. And then fewer students being engaged in extracurricular activities like sports or band or whatever clubs at school, but also getting a driver's license and part-time work. Now, my assumption is a lot of you have seen this as well, because I know that when I'm talking with students, receiving accommodations, a lot of them will tell me that they don't drive. So I'm seeing a lot of this. Is this what you're seeing as well? Yeah. Okay. All right. So how does it sound like in the classroom, or, for those of us in student services when students are in our offices talking? So what does that sound like? Take a moment to read over those. I won't read it to you. And I would like to get some feedback from you about some of the things listed here.
Feel free to take yourself off mute or add comments in the chat.
I've been surprised with the walking into a room when people are already seated. I mean, I guess I've just never had that anxiety. And I had an instructor. We had an instructor here that would not do that. So that's been kind of a new, I just never heard that before, but I've heard it multiple times.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Anyone else comments, or are there things that you've heard that probably should be added to this list?
I've heard I'm afraid I'll embarrass myself quite a bit in speech classes.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. A couple of weeks ago, I talked to a student who said, I don't do people. That was her way of expressing that she's uncomfortable around individuals. And my assumption was individuals that she doesn't know. Okay. And some of this is new, like Rob said, but some of it, stuff we've always talked about, right? Because students have always been afraid they're going to embarrass themselves in front of class, in front of their classmates or instructors or whatever. But some of it is new, right? Okay. And on this slide, the one word on here that really concerns me, and a student said this to me not too long ago, a few weeks back, the word burden, that word really disturbs me. That's that one hurts my soul a little bit, because I would never want anyone to feel like they're a burden on another individual. Okay, so how does it look in the classroom? So, and I hear students say this, let me know if this is what you hear or not. Students think they should already know the course material. I've had students say like, oh, I don't want to take math because I don't know how to do math. Like, well, that's what we teach, right? We don't expect people to know how to do things before they enter a class, because that's why you take the class, to learn how to do it. And again, some of this isn't new, like, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to look foolish, or I'm going to look stupid in front of my peers or in front of my instructor. But again, look at that word inconvenience. To me, that goes along with that word burden, and those are concerning words to me. They're anxious about talking with faculty or anyone who is unknown to them. Some of you have probably heard the story, maybe a semester or two ago, I was talking to a student, and he was having trouble with the class, and I said, oh, why don't we just call the instructor to see if he's available to schedule an appointment with you. And this was an instructor who really approachable, a really nice person. And then so I called up the instructor, and I put the instructor on speakerphone, and I had the student talk to the instructor on the phone. And the student had a piece of paper in his hand, and he was literally shaking. I saw the paper tremble. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was afraid I broke him or something, because it was, but he was that nervous about talking maybe on the phone to the instructor, and the combination of the two, right? And I had not even thought of that, because to me, it's like, oh, let's just call him.
Hey, Angie,
Yes.
I've seen this so many times, and I think that we have to acknowledge that, because students generally don't have to talk on the phone, because so much of their life is mitigating through texting now, they just have a lot less practice, right? And so it's not just even that they're anxious or nervous, it's that they don't have that experience of having done it or having done it and made a mistake. So I'll often role play with students before we get on a phone call. If that's the kind of thing that I'm going to be doing with somebody, I'll be like, all right, so what are we going to say? So let's practice, because they're so inexperienced.
Right. And, Sarah, at that moment, I didn't even think of that, because like, to me, it's like, oh, this is an approachable person. Let's just give him a call. And to me, it's no big deal. But that was a very meaningful, impactful moment for me. It was a learning experience for me. It's like, oh my gosh, this kid is terrified. So the next one's interesting too. Students are distracted by the perceived judgments of others when taking exams. The things I'm hearing are things like, oh, people look at me, or I'm taking too long and I'm the last one there, so I hurry up to get done because I don't want to be the last one. Maybe they're afraid they're making a loud sound. I mean, just all of these things that, again, I have never experienced, right? So it's hard for me to relate to that, but I hear a lot of that. This next one's it's nothing new, right? Students are waiting too long to ask for help. We've seen that for years and years and years. And then this next one, we start getting into a cycle. So unaddressed academic distress intensifies anxiety and depression. It triggers more desperate thinking and behavior. And that's kind of the cycle that we're going to talk about in a couple more slides. So anything here that's surprising, anything that you think we should add? Nope. Are we good? Okay. Okay, and then when it comes to test taking, so I hear a lot of students talk about having test anxiety, and just for the record, that is not a real diagnosis. That is not in the DSM, okay? I'm not saying people don't have test anxiety. I'm saying it's not a real diagnosis, okay? And again, some of this is new, some of it's not. So, we know that a lot of community college students may not have had the best high school experience, and they come to us with let me try again, poor performance, in the past. And so, they do have a little bit of anxiety and, fear when they come in and take tests with us. Anticipation and preparation for tests causes anxiety. And then the anxiety makes it more difficult to prepare for the test. So again, we're getting into this cycle. Moving on, the fear of failure in unfulfilled life feels threatening. So when I was in undergrad, I had an economics class, and that economics class really truly is the hardest class I've ever had in my whole entire career, because economics does not make sense in my brain. Okay. And then in that course, we had 2 grades. We had a midterm and a final. That's it. The only 2 grades we had in that course. So there was a lot of pressure on those 2 exams. So I go into the midterm. There were a few little like multiple choice type things, but the bulk of the test was essay. There were 2 essay questions. I looked at the first one and I didn't know the answer. And so I'm sitting in class and I just started crying. And in my brain, this is where I went. I don't know this test question. I'm going to fail this test. I'm going to fail this class, and I don't have money to graduate on time. So I went from not knowing one answer to not graduating on time and never graduating from college, right? I call that disaster thinking, but I went there very quickly. Now I had to pull myself together, of course, and then, I was able to, finish the test. I didn't fail the test, by the way. I made a B. Just saying. I pulled it together. But I had the skills and the coping strategies to do that. But my whole point there is like fear of failure and unfulfilled life. Because again, in that one moment, I went from not knowing the test question to not graduating from college, right? That quickly. Fear of being evaluated feels more intense with more success. So it's like the more successful I am, the more pressure there is for me to do well. Right. People always look at me kind of weird with things like that. It sounds counterintuitive, but as a high school counselor, I saw this because those kids who had like on a 4-point scale, they had like a 4.5 GPA and they had, high SAT scores. They felt so much pressure to continue to perform at that level. And then on top of that, those kids were always in, band or sports and clubs and, community service and all of those types of things, building that resume, trying to get into a good college. And that pressure is on them. And sometimes it can be overwhelming. And then this one we kind of touched on a little bit, fear of taking too long to complete the exams. And, they're just so afraid that they're going to be the last one done that they rush through it just to get done so they're not the last one. And I think that little inconvenience thing is there too, that they don't want to inconvenience the instructor. They don't want to inconvenience the instructor because the instructor might have to stay there longer than they want to or can or whatever. So all of these things are wrapped around taking tests. Comments there? Okay. So, my job, of course, is to provide accommodations for someone who has a formal diagnosis of anxiety, right? We're going to talk about like what that actually means in just a second. So this is my job. And these, of course, are common accommodations. These look very familiar to you. Now, with anxiety, especially social anxiety with classes that are synchronous, I have a couple of students that I've granted the accommodation of turning off their camera so they didn't have to be on camera while in class. Now, I'll tell you, I struggle with that because on one hand, yes, I don't want the camera to prohibit someone from, completing a class. on the other hand, I feel like I'm doing them a disservice if they never have to connect with another human being, because part of education, in my opinion, is student development, and developing those social and emotional skills are, if not just as important maybe as those academic skills that we teach them, right? Those soft skills. So that's something I really struggle with. And my hope for just about every accommodation, maybe not all, but most accommodations, is eventually the student learns the skills that they don't need the accommodation, right? We're always going to provide it, but my hope is that they learn skills like copy of notes, for example, that they learn those skills and they can take their own notes competently, right? So, with that, things, especially some of those unusual accommodations like turning off the camera, permission to turn off the camera, my hope is that they can learn skills so that they don't need to do that. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a few more minutes too. Okay, so these definitions came from the APA, the American Psychological Association. So basically, anxiety is characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and sometimes physical changes, right? And I think some of the key words here are recurring, intrusive thoughts, and avoid situations out of worry. We're going to talk about avoidance. And again, sometimes there are physical symptoms, and anxiety and fear are not exactly the same thing, even though sometimes we use them the same way. Fear is like in the present, you know, there's a threat in my office and I'm afraid, versus anxiety, I'm worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, worried about the future. Okay. Are we good there? Okay. So here's one of the things that I think we need to teach students. Anxiety is not bad, right? It's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good, but it does have a purpose. The purpose of anxiety is to help us to avoid real danger, right? That's why, you know, it exists. So it's not bad. When is anxiety disordered? When we feel that we're in danger, when we're actually not. When it interferes with our ability to function, and that's where, you know, avoidance comes into play. And then when it interferes with our ability to be or to become the person we want to be. And I'm going to steal from mental health first aid. Just as a reminder, it's not our responsibility to diagnose. We can observe behaviors, and we only provide support. We don't diagnose. Okay. All right, so here's the cycle. So all day, every day, we are trying to determine whether we are safe or we are unsafe. So let's use a student, for example. So here's something that happened a few weeks ago. I had a student who was in a class, kind of shy and reserved, sits in the back of the class, opened up his laptop, and it made a loud sound. You know, when you start up the computer, it was really loud. And everyone turned around and looked at him. Now, he wanted to withdraw from that class because everyone turned around and looked at him. And he told me that that situation was traumatic. It was traumatizing. Okay. And I was saying yesterday that I wish I had in the moment said, oh, that sounds like that was really embarrassing, because really and truly, that's not trauma. It's embarrassing. And I think we need to start introducing some of this other language, because students use the word trauma and anxiety in ways that are not correct. And I think we need to give them more language to describe what they're feeling, like nervous or embarrassed, things like that. Okay, so in this situation, and so this student wanted to drop the class because he was traumatized in that class. His mother was in the office with me, and she was, you know, being supportive, and she was going to let him do, you know, what he thought was best. And I pulled up his current grade in Aviso Watermark, and the student had a 97. and he wanted to drop this class. And, I didn't really think it was my place to say, you know what, just get over it, go to class. But I said to him, I think 3 times, I said, you have a 97. And then he concluded, it's like, well, maybe I will go to class and let me see how that is. I said, that's a fantastic idea. Just let me know. Okay, so looking at this cycle and this student in particular. So from his perspective, the class was unsafe. Okay, because he embarrassed himself. He embarrassed himself. So he was going to avoid the class, right? Because that's how he was going to deal with the embarrassment or the trauma from his perspective. So he was going to avoid the class. And you know what? He avoided that class. So the incident happened on a Monday. He skipped class on Wednesday, and I talked to him on Thursday, and he had class Friday. So he avoided the class on Wednesday, but nothing bad happened, right? In the short term, nothing bad happened. So he was relieved, and the avoidance worked, right? So looking at this cycle, if we continue in a pattern like this, anxiety is going to increase because it works, right? Because we're like Pavlov's dogs. If it works, we're going to continue to do it. He was rewarded by not going to class because he didn't feel anxious. But we all know that avoidance in the long run is going to have consequences. Because he doesn't go to class, he's going to fail. And then, of course, the avoidance grows even more anxiety. Does that make sense? Okay.
Too much sense.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I'm sure everyone has seen this. That's my assumption, that we've all seen this. And I think, like on the student services side, I know that when I reach out to students, they just avoid me. They do not respond. And I text students. I just don't like email. I text them and they avoid the texts even. Okay, so how can we stop this cycle? So what happened in this situation is, I tried to passively encourage the student to go to class. So I was challenging him to sit with the anxiety, not to avoid it, to sit with it, right? Asking him to change his actions, his behaviors. So what happened, and because I saw him like the following week and I asked him how it went, and what he said is like, oh no, it was fine. So he sat with the discomfort and he was okay. He figured out that that situation is safe, and then he wasn't anxious anymore. Okay, so that's one way we can encourage students to, break this cycle. Now, you may not, well, none of us have the ability to say, no, you've got to go to class. You've got to answer that email. You've got, right? We don't have that type of authority. We can't do that. So here's another way that may be more appropriate for the classroom, is working with the way students think. So, and again, this is my regret, my conversation with this student. I wish I had redefined that situation for him. And I wish I would have said, oh yeah, that's embarrassing. But yeah, and we've all done embarrassing things like that, right? So redefine that situation. And then to change that self-talk, instead of saying, and I hear students say this all the time, it's like, oh, I can't do this. So just as a simple, silly example, last week at the spring picnic, I was out there and I had the hula hoops. And so many students said, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. And I said, oh, have you ever tried? Oh, no, I can't do that. I'm like, well, you know what? Why don't we try? You and I will do it together. You and your friend can do it together, right? And then, the majority of the students tried and they did it the first time. They were able to hula hoop. And I know that's a silly example, but we're changing the self-talk from, oh, I can't hula hoop, to, oh yeah, I can do this. I can do something that I've never tried before. I'm going to try. And then as far as like the test taking, here's like, how many times have you like, oh, I don't take tests well. I'm not a good test taker. But you know what? Change that self-talk to like, I'm getting better at it. And it's that growth mindset I think we need to promote in students, helping them challenge themselves and to take those risks, right? And to, grow academically, socially, and emotionally. Let me stop there. Comments?
Angie, I just had a quick question or comment.
Yeah.
What you're talking about, have you read the book called Don't Feed the Monkey Mind?
No.
It's really so good. And it really talks about what you're talking about now. And a lot of this is cognitive behavioral therapy, where you reframe those negative self-talk. And it takes a lot of time and practice. But you said something earlier about anxiety can protect us. It's like if you're stepping out into the street and you think you're safe, and all of a sudden a car comes barreling down, and the author refers to that as that monkey on your back starts screeching.
Yeah.
Get back, you're going to get hit by a car. So it ultimately is there to protect us. It just can be so problematic when you have a short amount of time and there's a ton of other students. So anyway, as you were talking about this, it reminded me of that book, and I hope that's appropriate to recommend that resource. But I thought it to be an excellent read.
Yeah, I wrote it down.
Okay, yeah, Don't Feed the Monkey Mind. I can send you the link.
Yeah, I made note of it because that sounds like something I'd be interested in. And you know what?
Okay.
You're right, Terry. It does take time. We are not going to fix this in one semester, right? But I think that's something that, if several of us are doing this type of thing, having these conversations with students. And Terry, I know in nursing, you guys do a lot of this kind of stuff, because when students enter in the fall with you guys, and by the time they graduate, they are totally different people.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And right, exactly. You have changed those people. They are totally different. They leave us being professionals. And I know with Josh and public speaking is the same type of thing. That does not happen quickly. And, he works with students, right? Josh, do you want to talk about, and if you don't want to, that's fine. Do you want to talk about how you do that? Because taking people who are terrified to the point where they can give a 5-minute speech.
Sure, we do it in small sequential steps. So we'll start with 30 seconds. You're going to give up and give a 30-second speech. And then we do it low stakes for the first small speeches, but it's small steps, incremental exposure to the fear of being in front of an audience that we take them through.
Yeah, and it takes time and positive reinforcement, right?
Yes.
So I think this is possible. And again, it just takes a little bit of time. And for some people, they might just need a little encouragement. Other students may need a lot more, just depending upon, their past experiences and where they're coming from. So I think it's possible for us to kind of help with this. The other thing, so my entire career, I have always walked across campus and I've always spoken to students because I'm friendly and that's what I do, right? It's just what I do. But it just kind of hit me within the past few months that some students, when I speak to them, they put their heads down and don't even acknowledge me. And it's not because they're rude, it's because they're afraid to talk to me. They're afraid to even say anything to me. So I am much more intentional when I speak to students now. And slowly, I think after students see me a time or two, they're more apt to say hi. And some are like, how are you today? And that's huge for some students. That's absolutely huge. And related to that, on Thursday mornings, I'm in the patent building. And at first, students would just kind of look at me. And again, I always speak. They were coming in and they're leaving. I always speak. And at first they just kind of looked at me and wouldn't say anything. And now there was a young man last week who waved at me first. And I was like, that is amazing because, it's a big step. That's a risk. So it's just little teeny things like that, I think, that we can do to kind of help students work through some of this. So looking at these goals, these are goals for students. And again, some of this may not be appropriate for the classroom, and some of it may not be comfortable or appropriate for you. So like the first one, for example, it's probably not appropriate for the classroom. What matters more, being anxious or being successful? So that's a little, I think that might be difficult. But practice that willingness and being able to sit with that discomfort. And again, that's what Josh does all the time. You're going to be uncomfortable, you're going to be nervous, but that's okay, right? You're going to survive this. And along with that, sitting with that discomfort, that's how we build that emotional muscle. We get used to it. We become a little more comfortable with it. The next one is something that I'm seeing quite a bit of, perfectionism. And again, I don't know if you're seeing this. So a faculty member told me that a student made a 97 on a test and then asked to retake the test because she didn't make a 100. And the faculty member's like, that's a hard no. And the student had to accept the fact that 97 is a really good grade. It may not be perfect, but it's a good grade. And again, I think we have to teach that that's okay. It's okay not to be perfect, and that we can learn from our mistakes. And I have mistakes in quotations, because I truly don't believe in mistakes. I just think everything's a learning opportunity. And I truly, truly believe that. That's not just, some meme on Facebook, but I truly believe that everything is yeah, thanks, Crystal. Perfection and excellence are different things, right? We want students to strive for excellence. Thank you. That's well put.
Angie, did you see Mary's comment right above Crystal's?
No.
Scroll up if you haven't seen that one.
No, I don't see.
So Mary talks about building that, another intervention, making sure you're building community and having
Yes.
students work together in groups and do those low stakes experiences, have them do low stakes things together, because then they can that can kind of diffuse some of that pressure as well.
Yeah, and again, that's another small step of making them talk to another human being. I love that. And it's those little teeny things like that that's just going to build their confidence, right? So yeah, thank you for that. That's good. And letting go of that negative self-talk, like, oh, I can't do this, or I don't do people, that kind of thing. Helping them with that growth mindset. And so like, yes, I can do this. And then again, practicing how situations are perceived. Again, that student situation, in my opinion, was not traumatic. It was embarrassing, right? Helping them understand that and reframe that. And Mary, kind of like what you just said, getting support from other people, teaching students to be kind to themselves, because my conversations with students, they are so hard on themselves. Again, that goes back to that perfectionism. They expect themselves to be perfect, and when they're not, they're really hard on themselves. We've talked about this, celebrate those small wins. It's like reinforce that behavior when they take that risk, and they, just even taking the risk to me is a win. And then one little step every single day, we're going to try to do something, even if it's simple as waving or saying hi to someone that you don't know, right? Okay, I'm going to stop talking. What else do you all, questions or comments, experiences?
I was thinking about procrastination throughout this, and I've battled that a lot. And I think sometimes it was just pure laziness, but a lot of times I just didn't want to start it because I felt like I was going to fail, or I would have these bouts of anxiety and I'd put it off. And of course, then you start that cycle of like, that feels good. I avoided it and I feel better. But then it builds up and builds up. I used to get like sweat, like doing my P-card paperwork. Like, oh, I hated that. No, I just dive right in. But anyway.
Rob, I've talked to so many high achieving students, really, really bright, capable students who failed out of college. You know, my last gig, I was working mostly with students who failed out of private 4 years because they never did any assignments because they didn't think they could get them perfect. So they just sat there and waited it out the due date, right? They would have rather taken the 0 than face the fear of failing, which to them was, like Angie said, probably like a 94 or something, right? So that's a really common pattern. And the distress tolerance of like living with that low grade, it's worse like than the distress of just saying, because you don't feel, there's that weird logic, like I don't feel as bad if I just don't put any effort forth. But if I try and fail, that feels worse. Does that resonate, Rob?
100%. Story of my life.
And you know, that was another interesting thing that happened at the spring picnic. I was talking to a couple of students and I couldn't see like in my peripheral who said it, but I heard someone say about a hula hoop, y'all. What if I fail? And I didn't see who said it, or I would have jumped all over that. But the student was afraid of failing at hula hooping. Right. And to me, hula hooping is pretty low risk. But that's what the student said. Rob, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just clicked it, but I failed miserably at hula hooping. I mean, absolutely.
But you survived it. You're still here with us. You didn't lose
I
your
got some
job.
yucks. I got some yucks. So it was worth it.
But it might end up on social media, which would be devastating. That's in their minds, like everything goes to social media. So in my class, what I do, like, I remember being in college and hating us having to go around and introduce ourselves the first day. That just was traumatizing to me, you know, and probably embarrassing, but felt traumatizing. And so, yeah, so I have them do it like 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, something like small group, and then have them introduce someone else that they talk to, as opposed to like talking about themselves. It seems to go so much better. And they seem less afraid of that for some reason.
Yeah, good strategy.
But there's so much, I mean, it's like, it seems like every student, not everyone, but a lot of students, I mean, claim anxiety over everything. And I just don't understand that. Like, where is that coming from? How do we like do something about that? I don't know.
Yeah, so a couple of things about that. So one, students use the word incorrectly, just like panic attacks. You know, if they get butterflies in their belly and they're feeling a little bit nervous, sometimes they say panic attack and it's not. Anxiety, trauma, all those words are used incorrectly. So one, I feel like we need to teach them what those words actually mean and substitute them with more appropriate words. The other thing, though, is I personally think that students are overdiagnosed with anxiety these days, misdiagnosed with anxiety. My experience doing this kind of work has been that there is like a diagnosis du jour. And right now it's anxiety. Several years ago, it was bipolar, which was actually kind of scary that so many people were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I think, again, misdiagnosed. And then there for a while, before autism spectrum became autism spectrum, everyone had Asperger's. So, you know, these things come in cycles. And I think this is a cycle that we're in right now, is the anxiety cycle. Yeah. Yes, Evie, thank you. That we had teaching people how to laugh at themselves, right? Because that's a coping strategy. I do something ridiculous and I just laugh because it's like, I am so embarrassed. I made a fool out of myself. But you know what? Here I am. Laugh about it. Everyone else is going to forget in 2 minutes, right? And we all move on. But that's a good thing to teach kids.
Well, we have to model that, right, Angie? Like part of this whole thing is normalizing and modeling. So just talking about when we mess up and that it was okay, not catastrophizing or like emphasizing how terrible it was, but instead being like, oh, well, that happened, right? I use that language a lot in my life. If I do something at home, I'm like, well, I guess that happened. oh, well, you know, and that kind of thing is the kind of thing that people in our family systems may hear, and they're going to get a different model. Or if we're doing it in front of our students, you know, I taught 8th grade for 10 years. So you can imagine all the times I've embarrassed myself in front of young people. I was such a good model.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sarah, because I mean, we all mess up, right? We all embarrass ourselves. And, you know, teaching that strategy was like, oh, well, and letting it go and moving on, right? I think those are the other things that we need to teach instead of dwelling on it. It's like, oh, my computer was so loud and I just embarrassed myself in front of everyone. Just letting it go, teaching that skill, because that's going to be very useful in life, as we all know. What else?
I want to invite some of our student services staff to share, you know, how this is, what this is making them think about just with their interactions with students or other things. I know that we've got some folks on here who are interacting with students and encouraging them to go see this person or go down the hall to see that person. Anything coming up for you as you learn about this more?
I think something that I've just learned how to talk to students when they fail, and when they come back.
Mm.
And a lot of times they go and they get that dishwasher job, and it hits home how important this is for them to get a degree. And then they come in guns blazing and they want to take 15 credit hours fully online, and really trying to get them onboarded slowly. And take one class, take an 8-week mini master, see how you do. And then, you know, then we can add to that, because, you know, a lot of times these students, they failed when they first started Blue Ridge. They weren't ready, they weren't prepared, they weren't motivated. Well, they don't need to come back again and fail. And just to be really aware of that and try to ease them back in. And I need to do that even more, I think.
And that's a hard walk, right, Rob? Because you don't want to perpetuate their fear that they're not going to be successful, but you also don't want to jump in with both feet again with them, right? Grab their hand and just dive in. So it's good that you've got that awareness and that you're thinking about how you can couch that, right? Like, okay, so what could we do differently this time to promote more success? Or what's going to look different this time around so that you feel like you can be more successful? Yeah,
Definitely. I'm really loving the 8-week classes because of that. Because they can kind of really dive in, and in a very quick, short amount of time, they can get success. And then maybe add another, you know, 8-week class to the second 8 weeks. So that's just some of my strategies with scheduling.
I'll add to what Rob says. Rob, I think you do an amazing job with that. I've seen you in action working with students, and I think part of the keys, you may not see it, to your success is you're available. You don't rush people. You confront them in love and with kindness and with reality. I don't see you ever telling people, oh yeah, you need to be a nurse, you'll do just fine. I think you, if that's their dream, I think that you are very good to make that very real for them and not sugarcoat it. That might not quite be the word, but I think you've done a really good job with that, Rob. I've seen you in action, even downtown at the White Squirrel Festival when we're under the tent together. You know, people come up and ask, you give them information, it's written, it's in a pamphlet, a handout, you make it real. And I think that's a lot of the key to that success.
Well, thank you so much. It means a lot.
Yeah.
I use a word a lot of times with students that say that they're going to be a nurse. I'm looking at their grades and what they've done, And I call it, I pivot. We pivot. There could be something else in the medical industry that they're going to be thrilled with, you know, that if that's their passion and they don't know about surgical technology or respiratory therapy or something like that, that may not quite be as rigorous. So yeah, I try to do a lot of that.
Mhm.
So other thoughts, comments, experiences? Okay. If there are no more comments or questions, I appreciate everyone attending. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah. I'm going to stop sharing too.